Thank you. Thank you, Sean. So my name's Robert Miles. I'm CEO for IMMERSA. My background was, I think, part of the reason Sean asked me is I started life as a lawyer. I've been working in the renewable sector for about 12 years now. IMMERSA was founded about 4 years ago, very briefly, and we deal with all forms of renewable energy, energy storage, how that can support the grid, how we can enhance the utilisation of renewable energies, and obviously with this underlying pin of decarbonisation. The way I want to run it today is really quite an open forum. I'm going to give you a bit of a background around the actual energy infrastructure of the UK, and then go into how that application is being utilised today. So please, if I waffle, if I come up with acronyms which you don't understand, which is highly likely, I sound like a bad rapper most of the time when I talk about EPCs and O&Ms and the SPVs, but just stop me and ask me, and again, if there's any points during it, just put your hand up and I'll do my best to answer. So, yeah, can everyone hear me? Yeah. So I think the first question I'm going to ask, and this is an open question, is where does power come from? I'm talking specifically here for the time being about the UK market. So if we were to say the largest percentage of power, where would anyone say that that comes from currently in the UK market? Sorry? Natural gas. Very good. Anybody else? Any other parts? Solar? Renewables? Nuclear. So this slide here is a live extract from the UK market a couple of days ago. There's a website called www.gridwatch.co.uk where I've taken this from, and I think the interesting thing to see here is it gives us at any given time where our power is being generated and how we're using it. So you'll see the first one over there is demand, as I find the pointer. So that's actually what we're utilising. So we generally fluctuate between 40 gigawatts and 60 gigawatts. You see at this time a lot from renewables, which is predominantly from the wind, this windy day. But one of the big things that people are not aware of is what we call CCGT, which is combined cycle gas turbines. This generally, because it's a very windy day, it's actually lower than we normally see it. So it's generally around 40% of our power comes from gas turbines sat in shipping freight all across the country, which most of us wouldn't have been aware of. So this is, obviously, we know that coal, I'll get used to this. We know that coal, we've got the 2025, no more coal, so we're seeing less and less on the grid. Last year, we were seeing more and more days where we had no coal generation at all, which was fantastic. But it's good. We also have a reliance of what we call interconnectors. So we have one from France, we have one from the Netherlands, we have one from Belgium and Ireland. So we are not an independent power generating state. I think that's really important to understand. What that's going to look like out of the back of Brexit, let's not go down that road too much today, but it's something that's really clear is that we are not self-sufficient right now. We've got more and more pressures coming on to us with decarbonisation, with increased utilisation of power and need for electrification of transportation, electric vehicles, and all of the rest of it. And what we're leaning towards is renewable generation, which is called disruptive generation. We never know when it's going to produce power or how it's going to produce power. So we need to find some solutions for that. So before we get to all of that, I thought it's worth breaking down the actual cost of energy and what percentage of our energy bills actually comprise from that actual power, the actual electricity that's given to us. I think we'll be amazed to see that of our overall energy bills, only 32%, this is predicted for this year and next year, will be for the actual commodity itself. 42% of that is for levies, And then we've got the distribution or the delivery of the system, which are the transmission distribution, which we'll go into. And the suppliers actually make a really small margin. So when we all beat up the energy companies about being these big monstrosities, yes, we've been on the phone for hours wanting to cry about it, but really they're working on very, very tight margins. What we're seeing the predominance of our bills is the levies that are coming. And these come in an enormous different form of benefits, of forms. And these are balanced, they're based on the power that we actually import. So the predominance of these are, we've seen the subsidies that everyone's getting, the feed-in tariff, renewable obligation. Are people familiar with those? These are where the government subsidise the deployment to accelerate the deployment of renewable power. The government aren't paying for that. They're setting legislation up for that, for us all to pay for that. And that's where we're seeing these charges here. We've got different ones: capacity market, which is backup power; renewable obligations, which is a form of guaranteed payment if you are building, developing large-scale renewable power sites; contract for difference, which is essentially guaranteeing a minimum price; and then a feed-in tariff, which is set for the smaller schemes that we would see through households and up to the smaller scale solar farms and wind turbines. So it's really important to notice that 42% of our energy bills are coming from that. So we then have to look at how that power is getting delivered to us and who we pay for. So when we look at our infrastructure in the UK, this is the traditional form that we had. 100 years ago, we were cutting edge. We built an infrastructure which was designed for centralised generation. We had all these coal power stations sat in the middle of nowhere, pumping out power, which would be going down the system until they'd eventually meet us as a consumer and user demand. One of the big differences we see now is actually where we're seeing the development of these gas turbines that sit there, the solar farms, the wind turbines. They're actually producing power in the middle of the system. So whereas we have this system that was set to go one way, there's actually now got bi-directional power supplies going from centralised generation into distribution areas down to the consumer, and then we have a prosumer as well, of these guys that generate and consume power. They're also taking power onto their site but pushing it back into the network. Now obviously this is going to give us an enormous amount of issues. So how do we combat that? How do we stop people using power at different times? Well, essentially, the distributors will penalise them by charging different frequencies. So again, when we look at those costs that are incurred for delivering power, we're going to have two forms. One is our transmission network, or system operator. We all know that as a national grid. These are the guys that will be running the main infrastructure from north to south, which would be traditionally attached to the gigawatt nuclear power stations or coal power stations. And they will distribute it throughout the country. And these here will then set different charges. And how much does it cost to use a system, you ask? Well, again, depends where you are. Now, what I'm setting out here is to show how much it costs and how we can save money by actually consuming power that we generate. So here, to give you an idea, what do these figures mean here? So this here, that if you've got a 1 megawatt site that you're pulling power in during a certain period of the year, you're going to be charged £57,000 per megawatt that you're importing just to the national grid. Okay? We as individuals, we have this here, it's called half-hour demand, non-half-hour demand. This is how we monitor how much power we use. We all on our consumers, we've heard of smart meters. Now everyone heard of smart meters? They've replaced the old analog meters, which had no idea of telling anybody how much power was being used at any given time. So what happened was we'd just get a fixed fee. For every kilowatt hour that we draw into our house, we'd pay 5 pence, 6 pence a kilowatt hour. That's on top of the power that we're paying. So it's a significant amount of money. And then if you're a big industrial commercial user, you have this half-hour tariff, which they choose 3 periods during November and March. And if you are pulling in a maximum amount of power, you will be paying, as I say, £57,000 in some cases per year. So when you look at these big power users who've got 20 megawatts worth of power coming in during that time, and they have no way of changing that consumption, you're looking at £1 million a year just to pay to National Grid. So that's one part, that's your transmission cost. Then we have our distribution network operator, our DNO, our localised costs. These are the guys who are in the vans that we see, who look after the electricity that comes right down to your property. Here we're in Scottish Power Energy, or Scottish and Southern. Throughout the country, there's different areas. And what they look after is, in their regions, they will look after those smaller power cables that take it from National Grid right down to your house. And obviously, they're not going to do that for free, are they? Oh no, there's another charge. Going back then, as I said before, how do you stop people using power at certain times? Because what happens is the infrastructure is set for a maximum power load. If it goes over that, that's where we get blackouts. That's where the power goes down completely. So what they do is they de-incentivize us by charging us an enormous amount of money during these periods. Now we call these red, amber and green. And you see, this has changed slightly because this was what we called super reds, but it highlights what I'm trying to say. It's during the middle of the night, these periods from 7 o'clock, these are when we talk about half-hour periods. That's these 48 settlements. So every half an hour through the 24-hour period is a settlement period, hence the numbers 1, 2 to 48 there. So here we'll see at the lowest cost, you're paying 0.01 pence per kilowatt hour. If you bring it into your house during 5 and 7 p.m, 25 pence. Okay? That's £250 a megawatt hour. There's a lot of money to be saved there if you don't have to import power. So those are your delivery costs. And then we look at the commodity. As I said, commodity only actually transits through about 30% of our overall energy bills. But again, depending on the time that you're using the power, it's all about a supply demand, quite literally in this application, as to how much you pay. So again, we're seeing these peak periods here where this 3 represents 3 pence. So the wholesale commodity price is 3 pence, and it jumps up here to 75, 80 pence. So again, concentrating on this area, which is again in line with this area, is already showing us where we should be targeting that energy storage. So, just to make it really simple for you, if you weren't scared off already, this is a copy of one of our customers' energy bills. That is the energy charge. So that part there is for the commodity. All of these other charges here are all of these levies, all of these additional charges for distribution, for transmission, which we need to tackle when we're looking at energy storage. Has that scared you off yet? Is anyone going to run for the door? So, just to summarise the cost of energy, which is really key factor to the commerciality of energy storage, we need to look at not just the electricity cost, but also the cost of delivery and all of the levies that are accompanied with us when we use our power. Okay? Again, all of these are variable from different areas across the country, depending on your network operator, etc., etc. So, next question then. How do we generate revenues or create savings? So what we're talking about here is in front of the meter and behind the meter. What we mean by that is in front of the meter are systems that are actually connected to the infrastructure, be it a localized distributed generation area or transmission area. And they sit there permanently attached to the network, offering services to the national grid, to the network to support that. And then we have behind the meter, which is essentially those consumers or prosumers who have got an energy demand and are utilising a battery on their side of the meter to maximise the benefits. So, maximising those benefits of self-generation. What we'll do, so we as a company and most others will need to model what that consumer is doing in order to identify the best system for them. An energy consumption is like a it's like a fingerprint. No two people, no two companies will import the same power. That goes right down to a home. You know, somebody's got two kids who are preschool and an elderly couple who retired are going to have a different consumption to a young professional couple who are out each day. And it's no different to a commercial customer or a manufacturer. You know, you take a school, a primary school who operates from 8 till 3 in the afternoon, and then you take a leisure centre owned by the local authority who peaks out their use in the evening when everyone comes home. So it's really important to identify what they're doing, identify the right technologies for them, and then we can start applying that to our feasibility. We have practical challenges. This isn't an easy area. You know, we have to look, is it feasible? Do you have space to put these systems in? A perfect example would be local authorities who are looking to do solar systems for inner city tenants who live in high-rise flats. Well, clearly we don't have enough roof space to put solar on a high-rise flat to look after all of those tenants. You know, what are the network constraints I touched on earlier around the issues of that local energy network? If we're generating power that can potentially feed back to the grid, we then need to get the consent from the grid to allow us to connect. And when we're under a system that is so constrained right now, it's a nightmare. The business partner sat at the back shaking his head because it is the bane of our life. We wish we could just cut the power to the network and get everyone off grid, but that's a whole different conversation. You know, and then whether their actual infrastructure, you know, what they have in their building already is going to cope with generation. So these are things that we need to consider when we're doing it, and part of that first review and study of whether energy storage and generation is going to be the right solution. So what we'll do is, first thing we need to do is we need to look at what power that they've got here. So what we've got here, this is on a daily demand through a week. So you'll see this is how much power in kilowatts is being drawn into this property every day. You know, they've got night activity, it drops in the morning when the peaks come in. And then you also have seasonal differentials we need to consider, you know. Do they have, this is a really nice one to use for us. It's very easy to model because it's fairly level through there, and then by month basis is also fairly level. Now, why is it important to look at this? Well, solar in the UK. Anybody getting in their swim costume going out to the sea today, lying on the beach? Not so much. So in this country, we have this massive seasonal differential. We've done work in Central Africa, we've done work in the Philippines, Saudi Arabia. It's a breeze. You know, we're looking at rural electrification, for example, you know, where in the UK that's really problematic because of the seasonal differential. How do you size a solar system that's fit for a system that only produces this much of the power compared to that in the summer? You know, end up a massively oversized system where you're losing the power and then just enough in the winter. As I say, if you're on the equator, Central Africa, it's far more level throughout the year. So, you know, let's have a look at that. How does that work? So we optimize that. So what we'll do is then we will look at how that targets over the year. So again, we need to identify for the customers, where does that commercial benefit come from? You know, you'll see here, this is a production that comes through the year for the solar. So your savings here are far greater, than here, for obvious reasons. It's important for people to understand that. You know, you go and put a system in for somebody in the middle of winter and they're ringing out saying, it's not working, open the window, there's no sun. Yeah, there we are. So get it clear at the start, but it obviously identifies what you're doing. What we then do is then we target with the storage, where we can store that power during the day and then disperse it these times here, which is where those really high costs come in. So you're generating the power here. This is where you'd be excess generation from the solar. That's zero there. So we've got the exporting power. We will store that. Here we're just giving the battery a bit of a blip to make sure it's fully charged. And then we will discharge it here through this period. And now you can see the imported power during that period is virtually nothing. What does that mean? it means we're actually saving £300 or £400 a megawatt hour during that period. If we were to do it this period, the commerciality would be lost. You know, the cost of power during the night is cheaper than it is to store energy. So it's really important to understand what the objective of the customer is, what those costs are, and when they come out. And then you hopefully go to them with something nice like this. Look, so this is a true figure. So this was a system which was 0.5 megawatt of solar. If I go back to remind myself, as I say, £763,000 this is an investment for, but 12.3% internal rate of return. And when we calculate that, that takes into account depreciation of the asset, but also power price inflation. You've got also retail price index, or RPI link. Now, what we anticipate is a price of power to be a far steeper gradient than that of your RPI. So again, you need to look at the lifetime of the project to say it's not just what you're saving today, it's what you're going to be saving down the road. And then you can get a finance director to say, yay, we're okay with that, sub 10-year payback, we're all right, and we're saving the world, oh yeah, because they then pretend it's about the carbonisation. The point around all of this is, you know, you will have the green warriors, which are really the forefront of these entities coming to us. But then you have the cash-driven FD, which I hate to say still sits there. We've got to get them thinking a different way. So if we can get the FD rubbing his hands, then we're going to get your energy manager being delighted that we're getting to where we're getting to. So reducing your imported energy requirements is another. So again, we talk about the capacity that you require to go into your property. And it might be that you want to reduce that cost, that standing charge, or it might be that you want to increase your production facilities, but your capacity that you have at the time is maxed out. The grid has said, no more power, we're not going to give you any more power. So what do? You relocate. You relocate to manufacturing facility, fairly cost restrictive. So what can we do to counter that? Oh, well, if we put some PV in there, some solar, some photovoltaic, put some PV in there, we put a battery in there, and what we do is charge a battery. So see, we're not using any of our capacity during the night. So we can use this, we can increase our load during the night at cheap times into a battery. So what does that look like? Well, look, here we are. This was your power peak demand before, and it is almost double, if not over double, what your import capacity was afterwards. So it's so many different applications storage can have, and it will depend on the requirements of that individual person. Are they after the money? Are they after increased capacity? So another one I didn't mention on here is uninterrupted power supply, which is what if there's a blackout? You know, a battery can serve on that. It's 40 odd slides, so it's only had so many. So that sort of covers some of the behind the meter applications, how you as a prosumer can start generating power and utilize storage to increase the benefits of what you're doing. So generating revenues through balancing contracts. God, that sounds daunting when you read it. So what we're looking at here is those are how you save energy. Secondary is how do you actually get money? You know, you can make savings through what we discussed just now, but some people actually want to see cash in the door. So what we can do is sweat these assets further. You know, we discussed reducing our energy. Obviously, the ipso facto that you have lower carbon emissions. You can hedge your energy prices, which I didn't mention. You know, when you're looking at exposure to companies who've got large energy bills, one of the major operational expenditures is what they're paying for their power. So if you can say, well, this is how much your power is going to cost for the next 25 years, then at least that's one less thing for them to worry about. And then benefits the wider community. But what I want to look at here is, I will fly through this one because it's quite daunting, is the different contracts that are available to offer those services back to the grid. These have traditionally come through in front of meter applications because they're behind the meter. So you can flex from being a consumer, you can flex your load to release power back to the grid. So what we look at here is frequency response, fast reserves. I'm going to leave that slide because I'm going to go into some detail here and I'm not going to blow your minds with that. But one of the main ones here is frequency response. Does anybody know or have a stab what that might be and why we need it? Oh my God, I'm feeling clever today. So if you think, we've got plugs here, 220 to 240 volts. The power there is coming from a nuclear power station, from a 50 megawatt solar farm, which we can't really plug straight into that because it might blow the hell out of it. So what it has to do is it needs to come down the grid in a controlled, balanced form at a fixed frequency. Now that's great when you can control the power. So if you've got a power station, you're able to flex up that power, flex down that power. But then we've got a world which we're discussing now of disruptive generation. Solar is fantastic, wind is fantastic. You as an infrastructure engineer who've got gigawatts worth of power on the grid connected, that all it takes is a massive blast of wind on a sunny day to see an enormous amount of power go into the grid. How do we lose that power? So this is where batteries come in. So, you know, if we've taken an example, it's a sunny day and we have cloud cover in the middle of Cornwall. What we will see is we will see the frequency, acceptable frequency, drop below what's required to sustain the grid. Just to add, if that frequency falls too low or goes too high, that's where we get a blackout. No more power. The whole system goes down and we have to restart it. So where a battery can offer that is, as you see the cloud cover come over on a summer afternoon and you see the power drop, the battery can actually discharge, pushing power back up. And you're talking milliseconds. The response time on the first contract was 1/10 of a second, 100 milliseconds. Before is back in frequency. And then conversely, the cloud's clear, and you have a massive inrush of power onto the grid, and it goes over frequency, and this is where the battery can charge. So this is where battery storage is really good because it can both consume and generate power to counter these measures. Really good money. Really good money. Negative is that the contracts are 3 months to 24 months, and National Grid are giving 3-month contracts. We're dealing with infrastructure investors. Contracts that we're currently negotiating are in the tune of £100 million. Now, no investor is going to put £100 million into an asset that's going to give them 3 months guaranteed return, even if that is 20%. So the challenge that we've had here is to get longer term contracts, which we're working through and it's coming through. So this is the most lucrative aspect of commerciality. Sean?
Is the free pricing response, how is it charged? Is it, are you charged on?
How do you generate the money?
Yes.
So you bid into an auction, and you are bidding in a fixed amount of money. So you will say, they range between £10 and £20 per megawatt per hour, but not per megawatt hour. So you basically will sit there in standby for those hours, and that's a fixed cost. Yeah. It's all right. Don't panic. Yeah.
So it's only at that time you earn that money?
No, so you will bid in for certain hour periods. So if I show you this one here, which is for store, but it sort of highlights, you will say, so for example, if we're talking behind the meter, yeah, that we went to earlier, we know that we've got this really, lucrative time here. So you say, well, I need the battery for me then, so I'm not going to do anything with it there. So I will then bid into a contract with National Grid that leaves this part of the day for me to use my power, and then leave it online connected to them for the rest of the day. And for that asset to be available, you will be paid that amount of money per megawatt per year. So to give that real terms, if you were to do 8,760 hours a year, is it? Something like that?
760.
Yeah, 8,760, that would give you £87,600 per megawatt if you could get a 24/7 contract for the year. That's great because you can buy these assets when you get to scale around £400,000, £500,000 a megawatt installed. So you get a few years contract on that and you're sitting pretty.
So you can charge the battery during the time that you're not connected to the grid.
It is connected, so you will hold a state of charge. So under the contract, depending on what sort of contract, this will have a requirement to respond within 2 to 30 seconds, and then you need to go from full power within that time. Then you have to offer up to half an hour of continuous either consumption or generation. So what you would do is you would get a 1 megawatt battery, you'd hold it at 50% state of charge, which meant if you got called for an over frequency, meaning that you need to charge it and pull off the power, you can do so for half an hour. Then also if there was an under frequency, you could discharge power for that half an hour. So that's how it worked. Then you're given a period of time to come out to recharge your state of battery. It's very seldom that they will pull them for that full half an hour. It tends to be a couple of minutes at a time just to keep that frequency on check. And that's why you just paid a fixed fee. They'll use it then during that period as they see necessary or as is required. Okay? These are stores, so this is what stands for short-term operating reserve. Again, when we've got an increase in demand during peak times, we may have a deficiency in power or generation. We saw in a time last year where one of the main interconnectors to Europe went down, and then Hinkley B took one of their reactors offline. So what happens now? You know, we can't ring everybody. You know, you all sat there watching EastEnders, God forbid, and making your cup of tea. You know, you don't get a phone call from National Grid to turn the kettle off, turn the kettle off. So there needs to be backup power that generates into the system that's called on. Now, generally, you'll get a 4 hour, you will get, with a store contract, you will get a 4 hour notice of that. The batteries will be those immediate primary responders that are there. Then you'll have secondary response that takes you to these longer periods of time, where the store will be a 4 hour notice. You have a lower value on these contracts. For these, they'll be structured in a different way to what we talked about with frequency. You'll have what's called an availability payment, which is basically quite a low cost, which makes your asset available during those times. And then you'll have a utilization payment, which is right, yeah, we need it, we're going to pay you X amount of money. Now, on that there, it's probably worth noting what happens if, which is actually where I met Sean, which was an Alexon meeting. So in order to look after this from the first stage, we've got generators and consumers, especially the high level ones, who need to inform National Grid at least an hour before that settlement period we discussed earlier as to how much power they're going to generate or how much power they're going to consume. So what happens if that's all done, National Grid know what's happening, they've set the generator to the consumer, and then somebody generates too much power, or somebody doesn't generate enough power, or someone uses more power than they should have? Where does the deficit come from? That's when people earn money. They will put their assets into utilization to top up these imbalances. That can be very, very dangerous if you get caught at the wrong time. We saw 2 companies, supply companies, go under last year, year before. We're in 2020 now, aren't we? Where the cost of power to buy that additional power for these guys that went short was £1,700 a kilowatt hour. You know, we pay 17 pence for that. So if you mismatch this, it can be catastrophic. So this is where you have then, these batteries again can sit there, secondary bilateral contracts with these companies that can offer this emergency power. It's actually a contract we're working on just now, Sean, I'll tell you about later. So yes, so store, this is another one. Turn up demand, so these ones I'll go through quickly. Turn up demand is a really, really interesting one. This is where you get paid to take power off the grid. So again, these tend to happen in areas of high generation, of disruptive generation, so where we see large deployment of solar, large deployment of wind. You've got too much power on the grid, so you get notification to increase your demand so you can absorb that power. Now, if you've got a production facility, you can't do that. You can't turn down or you can't turn up. But what a battery can do is actually allow anybody to enter into these types of contracts by putting the battery in the middle. Because obviously at any time you can increase your power demand by charging your battery, doesn't disrupt your on-site power requirements. So again, you can enter into that. It's really quite interesting, those ones. I'm quite excited as to what that's going to look like in the longer term. Capacity market, again, these are long-term contracts. They last for 15 years, 20 years. Sadly, they have been given really bad costs due to coal generation. So obviously we know that coal generators have got to come offline by 2025. Policy decisions in this sector are a nightmare. What policy didn't allow for was the fact that coal generators could still bid into the capacity market for a 15-year term, even though legislation told them they only had 5 years running. So what these guys did was bid in at negative or zero prices just to secure the capacity, which destroyed the market for some of these new technologies. And I will warn you, in all of this, there's the man. There is the man. Central Africa, we have had nightmares with Eskom, who are a monopoly. Even in the UK, where you've got National Grid, you've got the local distribution networks, you've got these old incumbent power generators who are doing their last hurrahs, and it's really stifled the deployment of renewable technology. It gets upsetting at times. You have to have a strong head and a big fist sometimes, but anyway. So yeah, don't be too disturbed by that. But there are challenges that come from all of it. So accessing the schemes. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can go directly to National Grid. You have to have an asset that's got at least 1 megawatt output capacity. It was 10 megawatts, so there have been some changes, but it allows now for any market entrant to go in with 1 megawatt. It does mean that you would need somebody who is able to understand that whole mechanism. It would also leave you as a single asset in that market, but the benefits are you don't have to pay third parties. And you're talking probably about a 20 to 25% of your revenues will go to that third party. The other ones are aggregators. So these are the guys that can take lots of small systems, bid in under a single contract, and create these things called virtual power plants, if anyone's ever heard of that technology. It allows you to put multi-classes of assets into the same pool, going into different types of contracts. And one of those advantages might be, as we talked earlier, around the frequency response being a half-hour reaction time, but a 2-second reaction time, half-hour duration. With an aggregator, you could use a battery just for a few minutes to take up that flak from a primary response event, and then put a slower reacting asset, be it a gas turbine or, God forsake, a diesel generator or some other form of asset that takes slower or a longer time to come up to frequency, but then the battery can actually look after more megawatts worth of power under a single contract, which will then enhance the revenues, obviously, for that individual asset owner. But it also allows anybody with assets that are lower than 1 megawatt to enter into these schemes. And again, you don't have to have the in-house expertise. You can rely on a third party to be watching those markets and maximising those assets. So are there any questions on that? I'm going to chuck some case studies at you in a second, but are there any questions that you've got just now on any of that?
One of the direct contract overview, I believe that would be the best option. If it with national grid, like station like government.
It's not government owned. Yeah, National Grid is a privatised sector. Yeah. Yeah, they've got limitations on profits, but all of these, all of the network is privatised in the UK. Did you talk about, nationalisation?
Sorry, I was going to say they would have some restriction, like in terms of the contract. Obviously, before you get the contract, you should have like kind of liability that showing that you're going to provide them with this kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there are a fixed form set of contracts that National Grid offer for these different types of services, and there are penalties if you're not available during the contracted times. They're under an obligation to secure these services for the best possible price, and that's, although they're privatised, they are under government policy and legislation to operate in a certain way, and one of those is to push down the prices as much as they can to us as the consumers. But there are standard form contracts that you have to submit. You have to have your assets tested. So there'll be a testing protocol to show that your asset is capable of achieving those contracts. And then you have to bid into the auction. That's where the problem comes, I would say, from National Grid directly. We developed 300-400, I think we've got 500-600 megawatts of developed assets now. And we bid in 18 months ago to the FFR with 215 megawatts of assets. On financial terms, that's £115 million of capital to be deployed. There were 215 batteries that bid into it, and they awarded 3 contracts. They went to diesel generators, gas generators. Yeah. So the problem that you have with bidding those contracts directly is you are exposed to that. Whereas with an aggregator, it does give you the opportunity to contract with the aggregator under existing contracts. So they're constantly bidding in. And because they pool their assets, you're going to get far more certain, secure revenue from one of those types of contracts than bidding in, albeit you're going to get, obviously, a lesser slice of the pie. But there are definitely benefits, I would say, to going to an aggregated route.
Hi, I'm Dilip.
Hi.
I'm one of Sean's supervisors. Supervised by him. I'm looking into impact of wind generation on the balancing service requirements. Incidentally, my research shows that as we push more wind into the system, we need to have more balancing requirement. And for the last 10 years, the requirement of balancing services have tripled from
Yeah.
I also saw that amidst all the balancing services, the requirement of constraint services have increased. So I wanted to understand, does battery play a significant role there? And if yes, and what are the future in reducing the cost of balancing through batteries?
Yeah. Brilliant question. So, shall we talk about clear sky thinking and then reality of policy? So absolutely, batteries will reduce the requirements of balancing services, especially if they're co-located on the sites in which need constraining. We actually put a competition into Bayes. We've been busy, haven't we? We actually put an application for a competition into Bayes for a storage at scale, which was utilising a vanadium flow battery, which is a longer duration battery, to co-locate with solar to establish that solar should be able to be given baseload credentials, which wind has already. So absolutely, if you just have to look at, flicking back to here, this is what a battery can do. You can take this disruptive generation, this unpredictability, and smooth it. Then it comes into, so yes, and we will go down that road. We've got this transition where the distribution network operator, which we currently have got no visibility about what is going on their network. So the system operator, National Grid, has got bi-directional vision of what's happening on the national grid. They know what power is being generated, they know what power is being consumed, and as such can flex those loads. The network operator has got to operate their network blind. So they have got to put an infrastructure in there which matches the maximum demand of every one of their consumers within their network, which means they've got such an oversized system or super constrained depending where you are. I don't know if anyone's heard of the transition from a distributed network operator to a distribution system operator. So it's going from what we call a DNO to a DSO. Fabulous reading, honestly, keep you up all night. The idea is that they're going to have more visibility, and very much so. If you can think, and you will also call them virtual private wires. So if you think, you've got solar over here, battery over there, but they're talking to each other, then instead of constraining the solar or the wind, you can simultaneously increase your load to that battery, either on the same site or on a different point. Absolutely. And that's something that we're really fighting for at the minute. Sadly, at the minute, the moment you put a solar together with a battery, even if it's behind the grid, they will say your solar is 100 kilowatts, your battery is 100 kilowatts, so you've got 200 kilowatts worth of generation. So no, it's double what you want. And it's painful. But yeah, it's certainly where we're hoping to go.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened to powers that are generated, and if you are unable to get the bidding, what will happen to the power that you have generated? What will you do with it? Generated power, you are unable to get any bidding to transfer it to the grid. What happened to actually?
So there's different forms. So in essence, first of all, to remember that a standalone battery doesn't generate its own power, so it needs to charge. So there are other ways of utilizing power. So, we looked at the intraday commodity fluctuation of the price. So we call this arbitrage. So there's other opportunities to trade power. So, we have negative power pricing. So you might buy power when you're on a negative and then sell it when you're in your peak demand. But the problem that we've got with batteries is really to get to a commercially feasible level, we have to what we call stack the revenues. So any individual revenue doesn't quite hold a business case to substantiate the deployment. So it really does need a combination. There are big companies, so Centrica, for example, put a 50 megawatt, one of the early batteries. They couldn't get into the contract. They spent at the time £30 million, £40 million, and it sat idle. Yeah, there were some rat hands there, but yeah, that's one of the major issues that we've got for in front of meter deployment is the security for the longevity of those contracts. We're actually just working on one now, which gives us a 7-year. In the same way as we're talking about availability and utilization, we've been working on a contract for the last 18 months, which we are just about to sign the dotted lines on, which gives a 7-year return, fixed return, which means it now opens the doors to the traditional institutional investors that we've dealt with previously with the subsidized market where they had that long term. So it is 2020 is going to be a crazy year for storage. I mean, it's been a horrendous 4 years, but it's going to be a crazy year.
Battery is a very important part in your energy storage system. I want to know which kind of battery technology are you using now in your system, and can you give some comments about the battery choice, for example, for LFP, NCM, and then acid battery?
Yeah, so it's very much about the application. The contracts that are being given right now are based on the nominal output. So if you think batteries are rated under two bases, one is the actual power output, and then one is the actual stored energy. So when we were discussing the contracts that require half an hour, a 1 hour battery, so 1 megawatt, 1 megawatt hour was the right application for that. The most cost effective for that size at the minute will be lithium, either magnesium cobalt or lithium phosphate. We go towards lithium phosphate because of the environmental and the ethical issues around mining of cobalt. When you start looking at a longer duration battery, I think what we're going to be seeing next, which is really at the forefront, is vanadium flow batteries. So these have got 25-year, 30-year lifetime. They have no degradation. The electrolytes are reusable. So from the environmental impact perspective, fantastic. But the capital that's required on those, because you're only getting the revenues from the nominal capacity, not the stored capacity, and you can't get less than 2 or 3 hours, it's difficult to get that model to work. Lead acids will always have their application, but sadly they tend to be set there idle for big power charges. So, you know, when we talk about this nominal power output, whereas the vanadium would require that the store capacity would be far greater, and therefore you discharge or charge for a longer time. Lead acid is a small bit of power which can actually boost power out. If you think small battery, 48 volt, can start a truck, and then you need to recharge it. So it's finding the right application. So lead acid is a great application for UPS, where you need to start a backup generator. Lithium is good for 1 to 2 hours, and then you go into vanadium, which will be 4 to 12 hours. I think in the UK, you won't have justification for more than a 4-hour battery because you'll never get enough cycles on your daily rate to justify it. You know, if you are in a more tropical climate where your seasonal differential is more level and your 12-12 day night, then you can look at those longer term. I think also, you know, when we talk about energy storage, we aren't just talking about batteries. You know, I think historically we always forget things like pumped hydro. We've got 2 massive pumped hydro reservoirs in the UK that are still bidding in, have been there for years, that still serve a really important purpose, but it's about the reaction time and the bidirectional power that it can't do. You know, hydrogen, I think hydrogen is going to be a massive player. I think certainly within transport infrastructure, where we're looking at the electrification of transportation, but we're probably looking at that 5-10 year window before we really get to that commercial deployment stage of that. So, you know, people will say, oh, well, what do I do? Do I do this or do I wait? You know, that's one of the prime questions that we ever get from anybody. And what I would say is, we've had many conversations around whether staying away, and I've never found a single person that said to me, I went into renewables too soon. You know, what they said is, damn it, I should have done it sooner. But it's identifying the short-term, mid-term and long-term goals, I think. So, you know, the application will be very much the driver for your the technology choice. Okay.
She was a battery company.
Oh, that's the one. So you're lead acid, are you? Do you work with lead acid batteries?
Yes, it's a battery.
Yeah.
For China.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, it's our main we have partnership with EVE. If you know EVE. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. So Alpha, if you know Alpha. Yeah.
I come from Cork.
Okay. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So that we partner with them. So I'm director for Alpha ESS UK as well. So, and we have try and get as much across as we can. Shall I run through some case studies that we've done? And cause probably time's getting on, isn't it? So Tyneham Lakes. This is a really lovely example. This Doncaster, you know, lovely sunny Doncaster. The issue we had here was, well, first of all, the fantastic thing about this project, it was driven with renewables and green credentials as the driver. It wasn't something to establish a tick box exercise. It actually had the primary basis of sustainability. They came in and they wanted to build a hotel, these lovely resorts, chalets around a lake, but they had a restricted 100 kVA incoming capacity. So already we had a challenge to overcome. So what we did here is we put solar on each of the lodges with a centralized battery, so essentially created our own private wire. And through the solar on the lodges, just 3 kilowatts on each lodge, and 166 nominal output capacity and a half megawatt hour stored capacity, took this 70% off grid. But not only did it do that, it allowed us to use that 100 kVA incoming power and be able to look after a peaking load of 260 without having to reinforce the network. Lovely example. China Fleet. This is a hotel golf complex down in sunny Cornwall. They had a CHP. We've done solar, again a battery. Again, what we did here as well, we put 128 different points of energy monitoring to see exactly how that power was used, how it was being distributed through the site, to then identify the best solution. We spent far too much money and far too much time on that project, but it was lovely. But again, reduction, so increasing the utilization of the solar generated on site from 30% to 85% on-site consumption, and reduced their imported capacity or imported requirements by about 60%. That was one of the boxes that's... and then this is one of the ones that we're just in the process about to build. So this is one of the big babies. This is a utility scale project, 50 megawatts here. To give you an idea of scale, that's 25 40-foot containers, like the ISO shipping containers, full of batteries. So you probably don't want to lick the positive and negative on that one. And to give you an idea around costs, what are we looking at on revenues here? So again, we've got these nice fixed term contracts, which is opening the market for us. For a 1.2 hour battery, it's a total investment of £22 million, and between a 7 and 10 year payback. So certainly becoming very attractive. I'm guessing you'll be able to share these slides anyway, Sean. So this is a real example of one of the projects that we are currently in the process of closing the deal for.
Is the development rights, is there access to the land? And what is development rights?
What's this? So as a developer, probably should have shown that one, shouldn't we, Stephen? So what we will do is we will go and find landowners who have got suitable land. We will then make an application to the network for a connection. We then basically develop the site in the same way as somebody building houses. They'll go and buy some land, they'll take it through planning, and then they will sell those rights. So that's what we do there. So one part of our business is development, where we take a plot of land, we get it fully consented, we get all the connections, we do the designs, and then we build them and we'll sell them. So that's one of the aspects of this business from commerciality of storage is the developer area is a fairly simple one.
Is it UK based project?
Say again?
Is this project based in UK?
Yeah. It's in. I'm allowed to say Melksham. It's our project until it's sold. It's our project. Say what we want, can't we? It's Melksham. So that's into SSE. But we've got projects not far from here as well. Literally going from north to south. I'm in London tomorrow, trying to push one forward, which is in Fife, so not far from here at all. So it's 25 megawatt. But yeah, I think questions.
Any other questions?
What do I drink at lager? If that was a question.
You might want to talk a little bit about your experience in Africa or other countries.
Okay.
So all this energy storage or battery storage can be used to do for other countries. So let us get as clear our international.
Okay. So one of the big things which is quite close to our hearts is rural electrification. You've got small villages that really it's impossible to connect the grid to provide power. and you know, we've got I've got video. I didn't have it here actually. Where there was one small village in Philippines which had 3-4 hours worth of power a day. You know, that's schools, they didn't have power to supply, the medical centres. So we took a battery and solar in there, and again, because of where it was located, we were able to pretty much take them off grid. And you know, these guys afterwards, it was, you know, they were reading at night. They had electricity to their homes. You know, we still put a diesel generator, but that became the backup. So that's a really great application. And we've done that we actually have an office in Malawi, which we're going over into Ghana, so Central Africa. We are in the Philippines, and we did I think the largest project that we've actually designed, although we haven't signed the contract, it would be a nice contract, is around £500 million, which is for one of these super farms in Saudi Arabia, where they milk 90,000 head of cattle a day. And we're looking to put a 150 megawatt solar farm. To give you an idea, that's about 600 acres of solar. And then using that with a vanadium flow battery, which would be, I think it's 150 and 1.2 gigawatt hours, which is 1,000 40-foot shipping containers. So it's pretty cool. And another fun one, we did a fun one, if anyone supports Tottenham Hotspur. I like rugby, okay, it's a wrong shaped ball for me. They've got a van down there which sells their programmes, and that's an off-grid van. So they drive in there, and that's got solar panels on its roof, it's got batteries in it, and it runs off-grid without a generator. Because this is something else which is really important, it's temporary power supply. Festivals and things like that, which have got to import all these diesel generators. I keep trying to push Glastonbury because I need some tickets, but the idea there is, you know, that's temporary power supplies. When you talk about inner city construction works, where you've got a really low power, and you've got generators that are required, and we're trying to decarbonise our cities. So, you know, you can take a really low power supply into a battery, trickle it, and again, I think IMMERSA's policy is the answer is yes. What's the question?
Appreciate it.